Good evening.
Good evening. You sounded quite robust.
Forceful. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That was accidental. I did say it really strongly into the microphone.
No problem.
When I said it, I was like, oh man, he's gonna notice.
I mean, overall, you sound a little bit louder than normal, but I think it's just, uh, honestly, the past 3 or 4 times we've recorded, it's been so hit or miss on what I've got my audio level set to monitoring that I still haven't figured out where it needs to be.
Gotcha. Have you made any hardware changes or software changes?
Not so. Yes and no. It's still using. I'm still using the same hardware I was using, but I I moved cables and all around, so knobs got
Oh,
bumped, and
okay.
so it's like no intentional adjustments. It's just that this is now needs to be moved a little bit, kind of thing.
I would consider I would consider that a hardware adjustment. Well, yeah. Well, no. It's on the
It's
fence. It's
yeah,
on the fence because in one respect you could argue that physically changing a hardware knob, adjusting a hardware knob, is a software adjustment because it's managed. It's not what we mean when when I think when we talk about hardware changes, we are really referring to different hardware.
right.
So, but I think but I think that I guess that would be a settings change, like adjusting. So whether it be hardware or software or even firmware, that would be a settings change. And then if you were to change the inputs, let's say you're using all the same microphone, same audio interface, and you like, well, I'm going to use this port instead of that port, and so forth. I would consider that maybe a configuration change.
Yeah,
I don't know why I want to tidy this up in my head and be like, this is how the things are, and we'll always label it that way. But it does. There's some. As long as I always tell myself, as long as I'm not too rigid.
there could be bonuses to being rigid. I mean,
There. Yes. So, well, well, I was gonna say I've spent I've had a number of people in my adult life say, I think you might be on the the autistic be on the autistic spectrum. And I'm like, did we talk about this? I can't remember if I mentioned this or not.
well, I mean, we've talked
Uh,
about it at some point in the past. I don't know that we've ever talked about it on the show.
oh, okay. Well, then I have new information regarding that because it bothers me, even though it shouldn't bother me. But and I know the reason that it bothers me is social stigma. Like when people talk about having ADHD, that one seems like it has less social stigma than autism or autism spectrum. And I think the reason why is because everybody's had or most people have had experiences with people who are on the autism spectrum that have been really or fairly negative. And so I think that's why I have this I uh, am when people have said that to me, I've been affected by or been disliked it. And so I was talking to my therapist about it once, and he was like, and so somebody who's qualified, and he's like, well, I don't think you're on he's like, I never would have pegged you for ASD. And I was like, thank you. It's like, I've taken a bunch of tests. I don't know how reliable they are, but the things that stick out in my head is like, I understand there are certain abstract things that I not just understand, but enjoy. Especially abstract jokes and that sort of thing. And also, I am a social butterfly. So like those two things make me think, oh, there's no way I'm on the autism spectrum. And so, he said I would have never done this. When he sent me a test, he's like, take this test. This one I feel is pretty accurate for base assessment. And I scored as low as you possibly, I scored in the lowest bracket. And he said, but what he said to me is like, I would have pegged you more for OCD. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Because I can remember being a person that wanted to, like when you adjust the volume of a device, I wanted it to be either on an even number or a multiple of 5, and I had to there was a period of maybe in my late 20s or early 30s, I broke myself of that by refusing to look at the number and just like closing my eyes and adjusting to the volume that sounded right to me. And I did that enough that I now don't have a problem with it not being on a multiple of 2 or 5. So
there's a lot to unpack from our flight. So it's funny because, famously, I have often made the distinction that I am not a qualified diagnostician by any shape of the fashion or by any means. I would have been more likely to lean toward everybody being at some level on a neurodivergent spectrum, not necessarily autistic, but
neurodivergence.
Yes, but I don't necessarily make a huge distinction between those either. And I think part of it's just because I've never had a negative experience with an autistic individual. I've had some interesting experiences, and it's difficult to weigh those, when you're thinking about typical social interaction and everything else, and try to figure out whether you would say it's positive, negative, or indifferent. I don't think you can classify all of them in that category. I think it's more a matter of, was it dangerous to someone involved, or was it just interesting? And again, this is also a little bit of just how my mind works differently for these types of things as well. I recognize there's that disparity, but I wouldn't have been as focused or hyperfixated on ASD as much as I would have been, what type of neurodivergent personality am I? And so I find it fascinating that you honed in on specifically that being a negative and not well, what else would explain these characteristics that people are pointing to? You know what I mean? Like it's just different. It's from a different place. Like from my place, it's more a matter of, all right, well, what am I doing that is different from typical behavioral things, or what is it that's different? Like I'm not doing it from a point of external influences or questions. And so it's taking a step back and recognizing that and really realizing how different it is to have the same thought processes from the two different perspectives.
Well, I think the thing about I talked to my therapist about this as well, and we both, he said, and I agree with him, and I think he said it. I was thinking it already, but just saying neurodivergence is probably a better thing, just because there are certain things that do carry stigmas, and talking about neurodivergence is like, okay, I think everybody has a little bit of neurodivergency, or a few neurodivergencies, and how pronounced they are, would allow a qualified individual to say, you exhibit these tendencies, and it sort of, it could allow us to move away from the stigmatization of specific neurodivergencies, and so. And the only thing that makes this is a neurodivergence versus neurotypical is because the majority of the people, I don't even know if the majority of people function a certain way, but we've constructed our society to allow us to, or it's designed for who we would call neurotypical to have maybe better success. I'm not sure if that's the right way of saying it, but it is maybe less difficult for someone who you would say is neurotypical versus someone who has neurodivergency. If the majority, of the population was had their neurodivergency was ASD, then our society would look a lot different, and that might be considered neurotypical. So, and then it's like when you try to tell you get someone who's trying to tell an abstract joke, and 90% of your audience doesn't understand the joke. It's like, that wasn't really funny. That's not a joke, and so it'd be a very different world. But the times that people have said, I think you exhibit ASD tendencies, have always been said in a negative way under negative circumstances, and so that's also why that's another reason why I was pleased to not feel like that is how my brain works. And again, it feels really shitty to even say it that way.
No, it makes sense, though. And that's why I was trying to kind of explain at the end where my line of inquisition for like how I've thought about it was not influenced by comments from others or external factors. It was more just, I know I think about things differently than some people. Why is that? And exploring the rabbit hole of different things that could lead you through.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to emphasize at the end there, was it's just interesting to think about my path through figuring that out was very different from what you've described as, how you have reached to the point you are now. And I think if I had been influenced by external comments, I probably would have felt more attacked and like it was something I needed to defend, as opposed to me trying to figure out, all right, well, what's different? Because obviously I have some other level of thinking about things that isn't necessarily typical.
Right. And I think when it's internalized and it's a self-examination, you have the freedom to, or you don't have any, you may not have a negative connotation in your mind with that, and you're just exploring who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate way to summarize. But then again, I've always looked at so many facets of behavior, whether it's driven by other things or not, as it should be self-examination, that I think that's part of why I look at it differently. Because to me, everybody is neurodivergent in some regard, even though we have neurotypical as a category. It's a stereotype, and I think all stereotypes fall short of describing anyone. But at the same time, we have stereotypes for a reason. So it's difficult a lot of times to reconcile how I view certain things like that with the reality of what you might encounter with most people. No one fits a stereotype perfectly, though.
No. That's why they're stereotypes, I guess.
That's why I will hold to my theory until proven incorrect.
Well, that's how we live life. So, and that's not a bad way to live life either. So, I do have some follow-up.
I saw, and hold on, before we even get into that, I have to ask, was it a dislike of the combining of the shows, or was it that you wanted separate note entries with still semi-combined shows? Because they're kind of in a half split state.
So I didn't even see that you had both episodes in one note. And I was like, why did he put two up there? And I was like, I wasn't 100% sure. And so I made it the second note and then deleted, made it so 219 and 220. And then as I scrolled down, I was like, oh, okay, I see what he did there. And I guess you didn't really add anything. So I guess.
No, all I did was create the structure to make it, there. And so I laughed a little bit and thought, all right, well, I guess he didn't like one combined note.
So now that it's already like that, you can see I'm deleting it now. So
it really doesn't matter either way. I just had to ask.
Well, see, this is where my OCD is kicking in. See, and doing two separate, it's like it's my preference to do two separate notes. And again, I think, well, I won't call it OCD. It's just my preference. So.
Yeah, I just haven't been consistent with it in the past either. Like sometimes I do two notes and sometimes I combine them. So
I don't think I've ever noticed when you've done two notes and combine them. And so it was just this time. So an unchecked me might have gone back and so God, this is a great example where I've gone back to do things for consistently. Here's the lie that I tell myself, or here's the rationalization, and that is I want consistency. But I can remember being in 8th grade, 13 years old. My son is there now. And I discovered crossing 7s and Zs. I guess if you cross it, is it a Z? And if you don't cross it, it's a Z?
I didn't know that there was actually a specific term for it. I just thought it was two different ways of writing the letter.
Oh no, I'm making sorry, I was trying to make a joke about how in America we say Z and we don't cross them, and practically all the other English-speaking countries say Z and they cross it.
Okay, that makes sense with
Okay,
the
so that was
explanation. Yeah.
that was the joke. That was the joke, um, or maybe a quip or a latent bromide. I don't know. No, I in eighth grade. Oh, I was only a month into eighth grade, but I decided that I was going to cross my sevens and Z's. I had not discovered slashing zeros, but I was going to cross my sevens and Z's, and then I went back into all of my notes. Again, only a 1 month worth of notes, but I went back and reread them and went through and crossed my sevens and Z's to make sure that all of my notes were consistent.
I think I did something similar in middle school. I didn't do it with Z's. I did it with zeros. Like I discovered the slash through the zero.
Slashing zeros, yeah. When I was much older. I think I was in college when I decided to start. I know I was in high school when I understood why slashes went through zeros and I really like slashes and zeros. That's one of the things one of the things I really like about the Wayfinder watch face is that it's got slashes through zeros. I like the aesthetic, and I know it's a functional aesthetic, but it's still an aesthetic, and I like it. But I know that sometime in college I decided to slash my zeros, and I did not go back and for whatever notebook I was using and try to make it consistent. Today I decided to slash zeros and just went forward doing that.
Yeah, I don't remember how far back I went. It wasn't necessarily way far back, but I do remember, at least in a math notebook, going back and making sure all my zeros were slashed. I don't think I did it anywhere else. I think it was only in math.
Only in math. Yeah. I feel like for me, it would have only been in math as well, but I could be. Well, I was taking a lot of science courses, so I know I was doing it in chemistry and physics and probably biology as well.
Yeah, anywhere else I would have just picked it up from that day forward. But
yeah.
Because I do remember during the same time we had so I don't know if you had the experience of having to take Latin in middle school, but we did for at least 9 weeks. And I hated it, and I hated the teacher because one of the first assignments was manually writing the Latin numerals out from 0 to 100 and then 100 to 200. That was an assignment. It was just kind of busy work type stuff to me. And I very much remember complaining about having to just write out numbers in a notebook. And then all of a sudden that teacher was replaced and we didn't have to do it anymore. So I don't know the full story. I was too young to be bothered with the details, but I remember it being a very stupid thing at the time. But I remember during that time frame, instead of writing out Latin numerals, I was going and grabbing my notebook and slashing zeros. That's the only reason I actually remember doing it at all.
Yeah. I can see that. Man, that's a terrible assignment.
Yeah. It lasted about a week before it no longer existed. So
that's not too bad. I love it. One of my favorite jokes is like, I don't know what happened to World Wars 2 through 10. That's one of my favorite Roman numeral jokes.
Yeah.
What happened to World Wars 2 through 10?
I'm going to have to use that at some point when somebody writes it out. Just, yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's the best way to so I never watched I don't know why I thought of this, but I never watched Futurama, and
you're missing out. Go ahead.
I know, but somebody told me about the line. It's like, that's technically correct, and that's the best kind of correct, and I've been using that, and it's from Futurama. I don't know why. I don't know what made me think of that, but it popped in, and I'm saying it.
It fits.
All right. Yes. So I had 2 pieces of follow-up, and when I was initially writing the follow-up out, I was thinking it was from the released episode, but it turns out I was because I listened to the episode so when I was writing them out, it was before yesterday's episode dropped. So it was before 218 dropped. And so I was thinking, this must be from 217. But it turns out when I listened to episode 218 yesterday, both of these items of follow-up were from 218. And I'm trying to remember to add, which episode the follow-up is from. So both of these pieces of follow-up are from episode 218, and the first was about when I was trying to quote a conversation or some dialogue that occurred in the movie You've Got Mail. I was trying to remember the term neoliberal, and it was not used. I was thinking it was, and it could have been used, but it wasn't. I misremembered the quote. But the quote was between Tom Hanks' character Joe Fox and his father's character Nelson Fox, who was played by a guy who has kind of a weird name. I think the only other thing I've seen him in, or that I can remember, was he was the boss in 9 to 5, working with Dolly Parton and Jane Fonda. And is it 9 to 5 or Working 9 to 5?
I don't have an answer for that.
Huh. I was relying on you. So I think it's 9 to 5. But I think that actor's name is Dabney Coleman. Anyway, so Nelson said, so they're in his office. So I guess it doesn't matter. They're in his office, and they're opening up a bookstore. They own bookstores. I think they're supposed to represent Barnes. I think they're supposed to loosely represent Barnes and Noble. But they're opening up a bookstore on the Upper West Side, which is New York City. Well, that neighborhood is a relatively liberal neighborhood, whereas I think the Upper West Side might be more conservative. Because you could say that the Upper East Side is old money and the Upper West Side is new money, and I think that tends to fall that way. Anyway, Nelson Fox says, "Perfect. Keep those West Side liberal nuts pseudo intellectuals." And he's interrupted by Joe Fox. He says, "Readers, Dad. They're called readers." And he goes, "Don't do that, son. Don't romanticize them." I always like that exchange.
I like it just because you could substitute anything for the middle line.
Oh yeah. I mean, he could have said customers. He could have said, there's. What else could he have said?
Could have Shoppers, said anything. Like that's the beauty of it, right? Like, don't romanticize them. They're grillers. Like you could pick any subset of activities.
Right. But that last line, don't romanticize them. And the other bit of follow-up I had was I tracked down. I'd mentioned that Don Melton was no longer Don Melton, and she is Elizabeth Melton. But everywhere says, "I'm Elizabeth Melton, but call me Lisa." And so I put links to Lisa Melton's website and social or instance on Mastodon, and she posted a coming out blog post that I'd read when I came across it, and then read this weekend when I was putting in the feedback. But it's Lisa Melton, and I can't help but wonder if she's referencing the old computer flop that Apple had in the early 80s.
Yeah, I saw you put the links in. I have not had a chance to follow them and actually read them. But just from the naming perspective, it was questionable.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, I know that Elizabeth has a lot of different, nicknames like Liz and Beth and Betty. And I wasn't familiar with Lisa being a nickname of Elizabeth, but I could see how it's a thing. It's surprising how many derivatives there are, how one name can have so many derivatives.
Yeah, and there aren't really that many that have so many different variations. You can think of a couple, but I would challenge you to think of 5.
For Elizabeth?
No, five names that would have multiple variations of nicknames.
So nicknames or derivatives of the name.
Good question. I would say derivatives of the name.
So I know
because nicknames could be anything that you want to pick. Like
that's
that,
true.
So it would have to be derivative versions of the name.
So I remember as a kid, I knew that Will was short for William, but I had no. I was like, is Bill short for Billiam? and it was, and I didn't know because it didn't seem conceivable that that Bill was going to be a derivative of William. So, and I can remember not too long ago, I remember somebody said they named their child Liam, and I said, "Oh, okay, cool." He's called, or they said this is Liam, and I was like, "Okay, cool. Is it short for William?" And they were like, "What?" And I'm like, "Liam, it's short for William." And they're like, "I didn't know that." I was like, "Well, I mean, Liam is a full-on name, at this point, but it's a derivative of William," and I inadvertently let them know that.
I don't know how many people I know that have gone by Liam, though, that where their name was anything other than Liam. I'm sure I've probably met somebody, but I can't think of anyone where I have known that correlation. Even though I do recognize that that Liam is a shortened name for William. I have heard that. I just don't know that I've ever encountered it in real life.
Well, I was going to say, I think in modern times, and it's probably been, yes, it is a derivative of it, but it's now set aside as we're just going to use it as their own name. Case in point, this person I was talking to didn't realize that it was a derivative of William, because it is treated like its own name. Whereas, I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, I guess at this point there's a lot of names. I think in my lifetime, the only one that I've seen that I've only ever heard of once was like I know a Freddie, and that's his name on his birth certificate. Freddie, not Fred, not Frederick, Freddie.
Oh, I've never met a Freddie. I don't
think. His parents are immigrants, and they were dead set on, or his mom was dead set on the name and didn't know better.
Well, I don't know if you could say didn't know better, but I follow the thought, right? Like there's so famously growing up, there was a we'll say disadvantaged family where the mother couldn't read, and infamously decided to name her children Orangelo and Lamangelo, which is literally orange jello and lemon jello.
Yeah, and
I wouldn't have thought it to be an accurate thing if I had not actually seen the evidence to support it. And it is what it is. But it opens your eyes to how wide-ranging and just strange the naming process could be when you encounter something like that.
There was I was going to say I don't think that these people were also aware of Freddy Krueger either. So there is that. But to be fair, this kid he's an old Gen Z. I say kid, he's in his 20s. He's an old Gen Z. He's right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z, and he probably didn't get a lot of Freddy Krueger anyway, because that's a
Gen X thing.
It's a Gen X movie, yeah.
Yeah. I was just fixing those in order in Plex too.
Do you have all of them?
I have all of the ones that are classified under the Nightmare on Elm Street banner. And I make the distinction because I think there was one other one that I may not have, but I haven't finished going through the entire library to make sure.
So I know that you have the remake, and
yes,
I enjoyed the remake.
What I can't remember if I have Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I think I do. I think it's in there, but I haven't finished resorting things to confirm.
See, so I don't know why. Well, I guess you could say that A Nightmare on Elm Street is a seminal franchise in my life. Not because I just loved them, but because they scared the shit out of me when I was a child. And I think I've told you this story. I got stuck in lying flat on my back in bed because my friends told me, at this point, it's like 1989 or 1990, and my friends told me about at that point, the majority of the movies were out. I don't think, I can't remember if the last movie is a Final Nightmare or Last Nightmare. But the majority, like Dream, I don't even remember what order they go in. There's Dream.
Well, so Dream Warriors was either three or four. I think it was
I know
three.
that was 3, and then there's Dream Child, and then Dream Master, I think. And I think Dream Master was out. Either Dream Child or Dream Master was out, but I think it doesn't matter. And they told me about it, and I couldn't sleep, and seeing like I think I've told you, like seeing the video boxes in the movie store bothered, the pictures on the boxes bothered me, but I couldn't help myself. Like I'd go look at them because they were right next to the video. I'd be going to the Nintendo game section to rent a game, and I remember this one video store, it was right next to it, and I couldn't help myself to look at them. So, and now I think about, like, my parents had no idea that's I'm over there, over the course of 30 seconds looking at these pictures on these boxes, and it makes me think, I have no idea what my kids are doing that might be similar. So, but that's part of life. They are their own people, and so. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s at the time I was using BitTorrent, downloaded all of them and watched them, and overcame my fear of Freddy Krueger.
Candyman was the one that got me.
Yep. I never saw it.
I don't know why I didn't really have an issue with Freddie. Like the very first one that I saw obviously scared me because from an age perspective, it would have fallen right in line with this is not appropriate, blah, blah, blah. But
yeah,
for whatever reason, by the time we got past that one, it was semi scary, but it wasn't kind of thing. It was intriguing. Like there was a good versus evil kind of stereotypical story, right? Like I found the struggle interesting. I didn't find the movie itself scary anymore. But Candyman scared the fuck out of me. And I never watched it again. Like I saw the first one and that was it. I was done. And it took a long time to get to the point where I would be willing to actually try saying Candyman more than once in front of a mirror for fear of what would actually happen. And that's the only one that got me that bad.
I think I told my kids this recently, and I know I've said it before, but you know that you're an adult when real life is scarier than horror movies.
Oh, yeah. Now I would love to meet Candyman. It's like, come on, bring it. Let's see what you got.
I don't even know what his shtick is.
So the whole idea was you would turn off the lights, you would say Candyman 3 times,
Yep.
I think it was, flip on the lights, and he would appear behind you. Very similar to Beetlejuice, honestly, which is kind of hilarious. But he had a hook for a hand, and he would disembowel you.
Okay, I do remember that.
And the whole thing for me was the mirror. It wasn't even the hook and the disembowelment. Like, once you get to the point where he's there, fine, it's on, it's a fight. It was saying Candyman in front of a mirror with the lights off and then flipping them on.
Wasn't there a Bloody Mary thing like that as well?
Yeah, there was one. I think it was 5 times for Bloody Mary, or maybe it was 3 times and you had to spin around. Like there were many variations on this theme of flip out the lights, say it in front of a mirror. Sometimes you turn around, sometimes you don't. Flip on the lights, and all of a sudden they're there.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I think there was. I think that I've seen that trope in American Horror Story at least once. That's a show that I really enjoyed. I haven't watched the most recent season, but over the years I really enjoyed. That was a show it was a good mix of, it kind of took what A New Nightmare and Scream did and took it to a different place where it's like, you got a number of horror things, and it was just a slightly different spin on horror that we've come accustomed to, but they'll throw several of those things into one season.
Well, it's like, so the first Saw movie was legitimately scary because it was different from what had come before.
Torture porn?
Yeah. I mean, it was similar to the first Hostel movie. Like they don't necessarily convey horror in the sense that they do just sheer destruction in some fashion. but it was different enough that it made you think and it made you squirm, which is what its goal was. It wasn't as much I want to scare you, like make you afraid to sleep, or whatever the whole purpose of scaring somebody is. It wasn't like it was Seven, where it wanted to make you really psychologically think about something and be terrified. It was, this is a manifestation of something that could happen physically that should scare you, but it's only if you happen to find yourself in this situation. But it was different enough from what came before that made it scary. And it's the same kind of thing with The Hills Have Eyes or Scream. For all the caricature of horror that it did, still provided that jump aspect because it had some things that were different. There were some unexpected twists along the way. And at some point we lost that, I think, in horror as a genre. So if you go back to like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, you had a very specific formula that worked and then became overdone or overused. And then you started seeing this playing with the genre and trying to figure out what could still get people to jump. And I think that's what gave rise to both extremes, the extremes of, as you would classify it, torture porn versus overly comedic, this is a horror movie from a comedy perspective type of thing, and really gave us a wide range of things to explore and pick from and see all of the intricacies that could be used to tell a horror story. But ever since that initial kind of overdoing of the genre, I can't think of a movie that has stood alone as oh, that's a phenomenal horror film, as opposed to a exploration of a facet of horror that it's not necessarily scary in the same regard as it's just different from what came before and evokes a specific emotional response.
Yeah. I haven't seen Hostel or Saw, but I'm familiar enough, and I'd agree with you. I think what has happened is, in the '80s, the late '70s and the '80s, they pretty much explored what you can with horror, and the genre started to trail off, and I think A New Nightmare was the first one that I can think of that was basically where the mid '90s and beyond took horror movies, which was it was a very meta take, very self-realizing or self-realizing, self-actualizing exploration of the genre, which was what made, I think, what made Scream so popular, is because it was it took the same ideas that were in The New Nightmare and packaged it up a little bit better, a little more mainstream, and I think that's why at least the first two were so popular. To be fair, it's like they've done 6 now, and they're still.
Oh God, I didn't realize there were that many.
Yeah. I actually went and saw the last one in the theater because I liked it. I remember telling my sister that there was one coming out because she likes them, and she's like, I didn't even know there was a 5th one, and I was like, oh yeah. So
I was stuck at 3. So that tells you where I am with following the franchise.
Yeah. Well, it's just more of the same. There's nothing like the first 2 were just a lot of fun, and the third one just sort of wraps up the story of the first 2, and it really does wrap up the story of the first 2. And the last one doesn't even, Neve Campbell didn't even, didn't star in it, no cameo. I think she's mentioned, so they didn't send her to Mandyville, and it was that they didn't offer her what she thought what it was worth, and she said, you know what, we couldn't agree. They couldn't agree. They couldn't come to an agreement, is I think how it was, officially said, and it's time to let somebody else take over the genre, and that's fair. I don't think that's a bad thing, but But I think, Cabin in the Woods was another one that explored the genre. Took it. It's in the same vein as what Scream did, but it put a different twist on that, basically in that same cocktail.
Well, it's like I would say, as you get to mid to late 90s, when you think about things like Seven and Primal Fear, and you start to see the emergence of really a true thriller category, as opposed to maybe a subset of the horror genre, and seeing how those things manifested themselves into this idea of a psychological thriller and where that went. And you started to see the difference between something that was trying to play mental games very specifically, as opposed to something that was trying to make you squirm physically because of how it was just conveyed story-wise on screen. And I think that really makes or marks the big difference between horror becoming actually this psychological thriller type of thing on the one hand, or more of a representation of traditional horror on the other. And so you have an enjoyment of horror for the sake of horror, where you would think of, monster films or anything that could be classified non-psychological thriller, and those things that really tried to get under your skin, that tried to get a very visceral reaction, taking more this psychological thriller route instead of sticking with the horror category itself.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a space for that, because I wouldn't call Seven a horror movie, it's a fantastic movie. It's a great thriller. I think
it's one of the few that still will kind of make me squirm.
Yeah,
and
for sure. I think Zodiac is another.
Yep.
I really enjoyed that movie, and it's a lot of it's like what you don't see that is scary. It's like leaving it up to your mind to fill in some blanks is what made it really scary.
Have you seen Primal Fear?
I don't think I have, and I think you recommended it to us.
I have multiple times to different people, but like anybody I encounter that ever enjoyed Seven for the actual masterpiece that it is, Primal Fear ranks right up there.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.